You alright, guys? I'm the world around you, and this is Pause for Thought on Threshold FM. So it's Wednesday. It's just gone 12. Well, unless, of course, you're listening to this in the future, in which case, I guess you've got to ask yourself if you've downloaded this episode to your phone and travelled back in time a couple of weeks to the start of March, for example, would the episode still exist on your phone? And that's one of the many questions we're going to try and cover in this week's show. Yeah, I mean, because your phone would still exist because you thought your phone was invented then, so that's fine. My thoughts still exist, but the show wouldn't have been put together yet. So would the show still exist on that phone 3 weeks ago? But if you're listening to this in the future, it's imperative that you meet me with this recording of this show on the second Tuesday of February 2021, because that's when I first heard this show in my own voice inside my head, and that's how I was able to write it. So you need to bring this to me back then for me to be able to write this, because obviously this week we're talking about time travel, isn't it? Most likely though, I'll be dead honest, most likely because I've been watching Dark on Netflix and it's fucking puddled me brain. It's a fucking hell of a TV show. Like, Jeff, definitely watch it. It's fucking incredible. There's so much going on in it. It's dubbed from German, I think, or Russian, but it's fucking mad, mate. I think it's German, because of the writing on the wall and stuff on it. But yeah, it's good anyway. But I think sticking with time travel though, because you've got a lot to get through this week. I think like the most well-known version of time travel would be like Doctor Who. But I don't want to just be talking about Back to the Future, Rick and Morty, Terminator, the 12 Monkeys for an hour and trying to relate all of that to the real world. I want to look at time travel as a very real possibility for the real world, for you and me, So I guess the most well-known case of real time travel comes from a bloke called John Titor, a man who, according to one private investigator, was nothing more than the machinations of a couple of brothers trying to trick people on internet forums. But why would we take the words of a PI over the first-hand evidence from John Titor himself? It almost seems pointless to even have first-hand accounts anymore if you're just going to ignore them, innit? So, just because a few of his predictions didn't come true, like Nostradamus has made fucking millions of predictions and not all of them have come true. But who's to say that John Titor didn't just experience a different timeline? A timeline that could still exist, even though in our reality the events that led to it have been avoided and that never happened. But why would that cancel out his timeline? Or maybe he comes from a timeline where George Eastman ruled supreme over the laws of time and the Kodak King himself implemented his 13-month years, into the calendar. And because of that, the years are all out of sync with this and his timeline, meaning that he got his years wrong. Who knows? But we'll look at him a little bit, to start off with. So, Johnny Boy was sent back from 2036 to 1975, apparently to get his hands on a very specific type of computer, an IBM 5100 computer. The American Army needed this in 2036, supposedly to fix problems with the computers of the future. I can't even pretend to understand why. It was something to do with how it's going to kind of stemming from the whole idea of Y2K as well, and that computers will reset and they won't know what to do. That seems to play a part in it. But what's strange is all of the information about this comes from around the millennium. Like there's not really been spoke about like now, accounts from him now or out like that, or no one's found him as a kid now, because realistically now he'd probably be a kid in 2021, so you could go and find him, I would have thought. I don't know if anyone's ever tried. Then again though, if you start going and trying to find kids randomly and be like, are you John Titor? Are you John... Excuse me, can you go and ask your mum? Can you ask your mum if I can come in for a minute? Hiya, Mrs. Titor. Is this John? Yeah. Do you reckon he's gonna time travel in 15 years from now and end up back in the 70s? You're just gonna get nicked, aren't you? You're just gonna get kicked out of the house and arrested, and they'll probably throw some weird paedophilic charges at you as well, because you're trying to take children back to the 1970s, and we all know what was happening to children in the 1970s. So, risky territory, innit? Anyway, he did visit though he didn't just visit the 1975 though. He was around like now. Well, the year 2000 or so, he did appear then. Like obviously because he was going on internet forums and fucking coast to coast speaking to Art Bell and that. But he wanted to come back to the millennium to try and get photos that he'd lost in a war that he'd managed to survive. So here we're already establishing rules for time travel now, and what we'll do is I've made a note of them all, and we'll come back to them at the end. Because if I start just randomly saying, "Oh, rule 1 is this," and then 20 minutes from now saying rule 2 is this, it's going to get hard to follow, innit? It's just going to make it a difficult show to understand and grasp. I mean, it's going to be hard anyway. So, I mean, I'm struggling right now after all the reading I've been doing. But anyway, the rules that I've found for time travel that seem to be in all of these stories, I'll compile them at the end for you, and they're all from genuine sources. I want to say that as well. Another thing I feel like I should say at the start of the show, but we'll crack on with John Titor. So Mr. Titor, he described this time machine a few times, and if I'm honest, I don't think it's all that important for me to tell you what it featured, because it's just a Google away. You could just Google the list of stuff that's in it, and me saying it still doesn't mean you're going to understand what it is, because even after like half an hour of trying to understand what some of them words meant in that context, I'm still clueless. They're just fucking words. But it was believed it was stored and used from the back of a convertible Corvette, which, it's pretty sick, isn't it, really? Because it's very Back to the Future, don't get me wrong, but with a much, much better looking car. So is it like did he want to do a Back to the Future 4, like Back to the Future 4T kind of thing, I don't know what you'd call the film, but anyway, the time machine itself had never been patented, at least in our time as of now. In Titor's time, it was made by General Electric, but in 2004, there was a bloke named Martin Pullman who tried to patent the time machine, a machine that many observers of the schematics have actually said it would function as a machine. They'd look at it and the plans, and apparently there's no reason why the machine itself wouldn't turn on and wouldn't work. There's just, like, from the eyes of both scientists and engineers, and at least through the scope of modern science as well, which, again, we're always dubious of on Pause for Thought, but there was no discernible use for the machine. So it would turn on and it would work, but they wouldn't know what it was doing just by looking at the plans and that. Like, you look at a radio plans, and people now would be able to look at that and go, "Oh yeah, it's a radio, that." But then again, if you took a radio plans to the early 1800s and went, "Look at this," they'd be like, "Oh, it's a machine, but don't know what it does. What's this? What does this do?" So they've got no idea what it would do. Interestingly though, Mr. Pullman he'd back-engineered the machine to a degree, but that wasn't his only dalliance into spyware or infiltration technology either. Martin had also, what he used to do is mix up LSD, ecstasy and NOS, or nitrous oxide, into spring-loaded needles that he would use to inject his victims' necks before he raped them. And he is in prison, or he was in prison for this. And usually, like, they kill these people, innit? Like, the bloke that, unfortunately not rapists, but the people like make mental technology. So, like, the bloke who got poisoned for making the water-powered car engine, and he ran out of the restaurant going, "They've got me, they've poisoned me," and he dropped dead in the road. So this makes me think the time machine that Titor spoke of either doesn't work at all, or is, for now, completely unfathomable technology, and that Martin is just a malicious rapist, like, not to say there's rapists that aren't malicious, but you've really gone above and beyond, haven't you, if you're making a concoction of drugs in a spring-loaded needle, rather than just, I don't know, like, dated methods, I guess. Anyway, but unfortunately, like, it feels, I should say that because he is the guy that tried to patent the machine, and he is tied to the story of Titor. Weird, though, that he'd be called Martin. In it, really, in a time travelling story, there's a guy called Martin who's looked at as important because of, Marty in Back to the Future. Now, I don't know if it's true, but Martin reckons his version of John Titor's machine doesn't work because he had Hodgkin's lymphoma at the time, and he was undergoing chemo whilst patenting the machine, and I guess he thinks he was otherwise occupied between the rapes and the cancer. I mean, couldn't have happened to a nicer guy, going off what I've read about him. But we're not going to go on about him. That's enough about like cancer-riddled rapists. Like we'll stick with time travel, innit? It's hard to see the first instance of time travel in the media. Some people say it's this story from Hinduism involving a nymph and a bloke who disappeared with I can't remember the name of the deity. It was the name of one of the Hindu god, and he disappeared with that god and a nymph for what he experienced as a day. But upon return, about 700 years had passed. You know, he just fucking skipped 700 years on Earth. But it's not that clear if that is the first story of some form of time travel. And I haven't read the story myself because, as I say, I can't find it. I can only find reference to it, which again is annoying. Lots of stuff about time travel is references to it, but not actual stuff to read. But though there was a fair bit, the stuff that I did read was all, surprise surprise, from the fucking early 1800s. Like literally everything else that I've been researching seems to have all started in the 1800s. Everything fucking seems to start there. Everything. Like it was just a story. The story I found from the 1800s was just a story about a clock that somehow ran backwards and that had thrust the surrounding people near it back in time. It's just a story as well. It's not a historical account, but it's the first instance of that used as a plot device or anything like that, as even as a concept that I could find. But it's fucking weird, isn't it? That I don't know what happened in the 1800s with people. Like, did people just start existing then, and they disappeared for hundreds of years and then reappeared in the 1800s, or was there a big change in the 1800s that made people's brains start firing differently? I don't know. It might just look that way. Then again, though, it could be that, because up until the 1800s, a lot of America and that was owned by the Dutch and the French, and the Spanish. Like the Americas, Spanish, French, and Dutch owned a lot of it, and they owned a lot of the world as well. So maybe there wasn't that much of the world speaking English. Maybe it wasn't until like the 1800s where all these other stories and stuff started getting translated into English. I'm not sure. But then you've got oral stories as well, and visual guides and stuff, so maybe that's not right. I don't know. Maybe it was just a total rewrite of history, possibly, that destroying not only what is true, but destroying fiction, and maybe even adding to the line, between fact and fiction. There was one thing, though, that I wanted to say about John Titor. He claims that they can travel in either direction through time, but for some reason, when they travel into the future, it's from his timeline especially, it's impossible to travel further than 2564, which seems quite precise, and he describes it as you just hit a wall. You just can't go any further. There's nothing there, and you hit a wall, and that's it. That's it. Even if you stop off on the way and try and go further, you can't do it. But again, a bit like with the dinosaur episode last week, it seems quite precise, but it's just long enough away that you don't care, innit? Like, because if we go in the other direction, like what was 500 years ago from now? And I did a bit of research on this as well, and 500 years ago there was actually, as fucking fate would have it, a time-altering occurrence, which is weird, and I hadn't planned for it at all in my notes until this. I thought, well, just for this sake of, explaining why I didn't think it was relevant that you hit a time wall in 500 years from now. Pope Gregory XIII introduced what was now known as the Gregorian calendar, which removed 0.0075 days from each year. And a bit of quick maths means that by the end of time, according to Titor, so when 2564 comes around, they'll be just over a week out of place somehow because of this Gregorian calendar. Now, it might not seem like much, but what if that was a way to extend the life of the universe somehow? Like, everything I'm reading seems to say that time itself is relative, and I always thought that meant if you were, enjoying things, then time goes faster, innit? But if you're on a train and you're bored, it goes slow, even though everything going past you is going by fast, But actually, in reality, what it means is that light can be observed differently, and we seem to measure time with light, or at least illustrate it with the use of light. I watched this, so just to give a little, I watched what's his name? Brian Cox did a thing trying to explain the physics of Doctor Who. Why anyone would go to that as a lecture, fuck knows. Full of celebrities though in the audience. Anyway, basically he's got hold of this he's got his mate holding this light that looks like one of them things that you'd use on PlayStation Move with the light at the end of a stick, and he's thrusting it up and down like he's, I don't know, fucking wanking off a donkey on its back. And then they're pulling him back and forth across the stage, but you show it from his point of view, and obviously all he can see is the light going up and down and the background moving side to side ever so slightly. But from our point of view, that light's going in like a curve, in like a wave, in like triangle shapes. So basically, if you move a light up and down while you're walking, then that light's just going to go up and down. But to an observer, that light's going up and down and moving along, which means it takes longer, as in a pathway, for that light to get from one spot to the other if you was to track the movements like with a camera or with your eye. But in reality, it's moved about 3/4 of that distance if you don't take the up and down motion into account. But it has moved up and down, so it has moved that distance. Like, are you with me? Hopefully you're with me, because I mean, no, I'm not either, so we'll just move on. Now, I did really want to delve into the science behind the ideas of time travel, because I thought it'd be fun, innit? I thought it'd be fucking interesting, fascinating stuff. But I sat at my desk reading for about 3 hours on different theories and how the machines would look, and I'm still not sure. Like, there's no conclusive avenue of thought where people think, yeah, it'd definitely be like this or like this. And then when you get halfway through reading like a fucking, some form of journal entry, like a scientific journal bit, and it's like, yeah, well, if we bear in mind Doctor Who rules, you're like, well, that's not real, that's not a thing, like, that's a TV show, and they're using that as reference in science, so it's fucking weird. But all physicists seem to agree that time travel should be possible, at least into the future, definitely, and maybe into the past. But it's fucking, like, the way a lot of people describe quantum mechanics, it's quantum mechanics is basically, from my understanding now, you're using the tiniest little building blocks of the universe in order to describe everything, and that all these tiny little building blocks follow rules, except for the times when they don't follow rules. But I'm thinking the way to time travel seems to be just in belief, and believing that the time travel will work. That seems to be, maybe I've misunderstood it, but that seems to be what they think, how it thinks it'll work. Like with that fucking, you'll all know it, when they fucking fire the red lines of fucking atoms or something at a metal plate, and if you look at it, it goes in a straight line. If you don't look at it, it goes fucking wherever, and it'll still pass through even though there's no holes. But if you look at it, it can't pass through because it's being observed. But if you believe it's going to go through, then it'll go through, kind of. Anyway, I reckon if you got an empty tin of beans, you know, a collection of pocket watches, bag of dog shit off the park, spatula, and a genuine card aerial, maybe a nice toasted baguette, bit of tomato sauce to wet it, a little pinch of salt and pepper, and you bundle it all together in a way that makes it look like it's important, and then you believe, really fucking believe in yourself. I mean, like fucking Charlie Manson level of self-belief, like you're gonna fucking change the world. Then I think you can make a time machine. I genuinely try to see if I can remember, from what I've been reading, what I've been trying to do is, because some of the things it puts forward are fucking mental. It's very philosophical as well, so, and I'm probably not going to really get a chance to go into that because I'm just going to get distracted, but I'll try. Now, to test it, I generally, before even doing this, I honestly try to see if I can remember meeting my current self now as a child. And sometimes, under certain circumstances, you can kind of convince yourself of it sometimes. And that makes me wonder if I'm actually doing it, if I'm somehow projecting myself onto my own memory by making myself appear to myself when I was a child, because everyone seems to believe that all of time happens all at once. Like the past is happening now, the future's happening now, the present's happening now, and everything in between and past them points is all happening at once, just somehow. But if time travel exists, then it means as well that whilst all the past, the present, the future is all happening at once, that every possible outcome in every possible decision that you've ever made in all of those times are happening all at once as well at any given moment. If that's true, then surely by altering your childhood memories, when you do alter your childhood memories, that could be time travelling, because it does. It reminds me of this story Nelson Mandela told me when I was a kid. Now, we'd just gone against each other in a sort of, it wasn't like a professional tournament, but it was a Pokemon card tournament back in 2002 in Warrington up north. And he wasn't there in any professional sense, far from it. He just taking part in the tournament. He wasn't particularly good, but I was only 8 and he hammered me. And he said to me,
Jack, I only came to Great Britain for the tournament, but I had to make it coincide with my visit to the Oxford School of Business. I remember, when you get older, always do everything in a week. It makes travel cheaper, and you remember it much clearer. My wife Winnie, she never listened to my advice.
and it's just something that's always stuck with me. And maybe Nelson was a time traveller. I've always wondered what he meant by in a week. I don't know if he meant like do it next week or do it all at once, in a go. But I mean, how is that even possible? But I mean, that's irrelevant. If everything in the world is made up of these very, very tiny elements like the quantum physicists claim, then surely you can make anything out of anything. Like with Lego, or those plastic sticks and gears that look like they'd be the inside of straws, and maybe a straw holder. Connects, I think. Connects? I'm sure it was Connects, wasn't it? Yeah, then anyway, by thinking to yourself, it'll do whatever I want it to do, then it'll do that thing because you're the person doing it and observing it. But again, guys, I'm not a scientist, so that's as close as we're going to get to the science of time travel. So instead, here's how I reckon it'll be done. We know that the universe has been constantly expanding. And if we can figure out the centre of the universe, we'll know that's the point that we've come from. That's where it all started. Now, that's where time itself also comes from. But everything in the universe is constantly expanding as well, not just the universe itself. So we'd need to know the movements of each individual solar system, then take into account the rotation and orbit of each planet. Once that's all been mapped out, we'd need to find a way to travel faster than the speed of light. Now, with this superpowered timecraft, we'd have to follow the path the planet took back towards the centre of the universe and try to aim for the spot in the universe where the Earth would have been at that time. Now, if my science is correct, the Earth shouldn't move at all from beneath us. It should be stationary when we look at it from the craft because it's always been in that location throughout time. But maybe we would have to possibly Superman the planet in a way, not like fucking, like in a sex way. Just like Superman the planet, like Superman 2 the planet, and travel round the Earth in circles at such a speed and in an opposing direction to the Earth's rotation in order to account for the passing of days as well. Maybe that's how you get there on a certain day, not just in a certain decade, As I said, I'm not a scientist, but I've read a lot and I've listened to a lot over the past few days, and that's my takeaway from it. But why time travel at all? Not as in the sense of why do it for the show. Obviously do it for the show. It's fucking fascinating. And I've probably ruined the subject for everyone. But I mean, like, why go back in time or why travel through time? So a lot of people say that they'd go back and they'd kill Hitler. Now, I'm not going to say don't do that. Maybe, yeah, do. But that'd change everything, wouldn't it? So a lot of people also say that they'd go back and they'd see their granddad. But when you do research on time travel, a lot of people seem to want to go back in time in order to kill their own grandparents, which I don't understand where they make that leap. And I didn't get on with my nan, I didn't really like her, didn't know my granddad's, but I wouldn't go back in time and kill her and erase my own existence. It's fucking mental. I also wouldn't go back and shag her either to ensure that my dad's born. Not out of like fucking vitriol towards my dad, just I wouldn't want to fuck me nan. Like, who would? I mean, not just, obviously you wouldn't want to fuck your nan, but I can't imagine most people would have wanted to have sex with my nan either. But nans aside, imagine when you, well, I say nans aside, like fucking imagine your nan's on a deathbed or fucking under the front end of a bus, whatever, however she died, and she's seeing her relatives around her that have died. Now, what if they're all from their own time, and somehow they're actually draining the life force from your nan in order for them to survive back in time, so that they can then pass on that life force through genetics to your grandmother, meaning that we all exist in some form or of never-ending Morpheus loop that has just got just enough twists and turns to stop us noticing that it all repeats itself. Right, let's have another song. This is Hopsin with Happy Ending. Alright, mate, I just thought I'd take a couple of seconds, to say thank you for listening, because no one ever listens to these. If you bang them at the end, people just skip a minute, so I appreciate you listening to it. If you could do us a favour, though, follow us on the socials, mate. You'll be able to see my bad taxidermy, you'll be able to see me ebooks and that, and what else I'm up to. And if you've got the time as well, find yourself threshold.fm. You can hear me radio shows, and you can hear me other radio show as well, Truth Seeking. Anyway, I told you I wouldn't take you for long, so yeah, we'll get back into it. Here you go. Now, one thing that we do talk about on this show a lot are rainbows. And there was a time-travelling thing called Project Rainbow for a time. Now, could that be why rainbows are used by countless organisations and people around the world? You've got LBGTQ, the NHS in the UK. I reckon a lot of glasses manufacturers probably use it because of the prism of light. Pink Floyd, and it's important as well in the MCU, as I've mentioned before, in Marvel, because it's how Thor gets about with the fucking Bifrost Bridge. But I'm not going to rant on about rainbows again. We might do a show on rainbows. I don't know if we'll get an hour out of it. We're probably due a fucking questions show where I go over like the spare bits of notes and that from other episodes. But Project Rainbow itself was more known as, or is more known now as, the Philadelphia experiment, a test that took place in 1943 by Americans, and it was supposedly to test a way of hiding a boat by trying to thrust it 10 seconds into the past, at least in some people's accounts of it. But that in itself seems pointless, because if you're under attack by something and you can thrust yourself 10 seconds in the past in a boat, 10 seconds in a boat, it's not in a big freighter, it's not very far away, is it? So you just put yourself in harm's way again and again and again, and then you're stuck there in this weird loop. So again, loops keep coming around, innit? Yeah. Others, though, say that the Philadelphia experiment was an experiment in turning a boat invisible so that it couldn't be seen. So I'm guessing it was after the 1940s that they developed the light bending technology, because otherwise how else would they have been able to show flat earthers, today, that boats that have gone over the curve of the earth, like a flat earther will look and be like, look, you can't see that boat there, look at it through a magnifying glass, now you can see it. Now, what if magnifying glasses are actually a way of seeing the way that they made these, a way of seeing through? So simply a magnifying glass, dead simple to make, just a bit of curved glass in a tube. And that could be the true scientist ways of trying to get back at the American government for making these boat cloaking devices, So we know that the Philadelphia experiment was a success to some degree, because it's been proved by flat earthers. But experts have come out to say that this never happened. And what if this sort of redaction of known history is the result of the Mandela effect? Or is time travel itself the cause of the Mandela effect? Maybe the Mandela effect was on purpose. Maybe John Titor and the victims of the victims of the fucking Philadelphia experiment are the reasons why we've got the Mandela effect today. Maybe they had to come back in time to help Nelson Mandela survive his death in the 1980s, and then the plot of the Terminator franchise played out in the real world, except instead of killing and then protecting Sarah Connor, the Terminators were trying to get rid of Nelson Mandela, but instead kept him alive. But because after 6 films the general public started to get very confused about whether Nelson Connor had died at all, or maybe all the time travelling meant that little wormholes were made and they dragged people through the different universes and swapped a few back and forth, so people remember their own timeline independently in this new timeline that they're in. And with all these subtle changes made by the survivors of Nelson Mandela, it led to lots of little changes, like the spelling of Looney Tunes changing to Looney Tunes, just as an example. Now, nowadays, the invisibility itself is chalked down as just making the ship undetectable to magnetic sea mines, but that doesn't explain all the very simply worded accounts of men being molecularly attached. To saying simply worded is fucking molecularly is a fucking weird molecularly. It feels like you're trying to lick something. The men's molecules being fused with the molecules of the boat. We'll get around it. And the ship reappearing, in a naval port somewhere else, and then coming back to where it was in the sea with all these people fucking melted to it. But this leads us to the true hero of this week's show, Al Bielek. Born in 1927 and with an amazing memory, claiming to even remember being 9 months old, and he was supposedly, as he grew up, he was a fucking walking encyclopedia. And all these smarts led to him being available at midweek in late October 1943, like on a fucking Thursday afternoon. Obviously, he was in the Navy, seeing as it was World War II, but Albert Einstein was also working for the US Navy at this time, and his life wasn't put on the line as like they did at fucking Bikini Bay with pigs, They just fucking dumped a load of animals in boats and then sent nuclear bombs to see what it would do to the animals and the boats. So that's basically what they did to Al Bielek, but instead of throwing nuclear bombs at him, they threw him through a time machine for a laugh. But they didn't do that with fucking, Albert Einstein, who was definitely a really clever person at the time. So was he trying to kill off the other smart people? Was Einstein trying to get rid of his competition? Who knows? But it could be, it could just be that Al himself could be just a bit of an exaggerator. So, he was aboard the USS Elridge. Oh, I got the date wrong as well. When he was on the USS Elridge, it was actually August 13th, 1943. I don't know where I got October from. I'm trying to pluck bits of this out of my head, innit? I really should put more effort into my notes. But anyway, this is when Al and his brother got thrust through time to the year 2137. And now that's about 100 years after John Titor came from. But did he? All we know for sure is that Al woke up in a hospital being treated for radiation sickness using mainly, supposedly, vibrations and lights. So fucking torches and dildos, potentially, just fucking rubbing him with these tubes, So, what if he was just highly susceptible to outside influence? Because if he was convinced he was smart because he was simply told he was smart, and because he was told he was a walking encyclopedia, and he wasn't actually all that bright, but he believed that, then maybe he could be electrocuted to the point of almost death, and then could be conditioned to believe he was in the future. Another sort of experiment that wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility, and wouldn't, from going off other things I've read, really wouldn't be outside the realms of possibility for the US government to have tried back in the 40s and 50s to people. And it kind of resembles the plot to a German film that I remember watching years ago about the Berlin Wall being destroyed, but the guy's mum had been in a coma, or his nan had been in a coma at the time, and they convinced her that she had woken up in Eastern Germany, even though she was now just in regular Germany. But in case she went mental and died from shock, they'd put in fake windows so that she couldn't see the billboards that was telling her that she could buy a can of Coca-Cola now. In that film as well, they made sure the programmes on the telly were specifically picked for her, so it wouldn't be a shock when she woke up that the TV shows had changed. And it sounds a little bit like the TV shows were changed for Al as well. All the TV shows in the future, according to Al Bielek, were either news or educational. But could it be that because Al was in the future by over a century, there's a possibility he just couldn't grasp how humour had changed and evolved? I mean, you could compare the humour of the 30s, like Charlie Chaplin, to the humour of the 90s, which is 60 years difference, And you compare it to comparing Charlie Chaplin to the second series of Bottom with Rick Mayall and fucking Aid Edmondson, or South Park even, compared to, I'll take South Park of the 90s and compare that to South Park of now, or even fucking South Park in the 90s, or I don't know, fucking even comparing the comedy of My Family to the comedy of Mrs. Brown's Boys, it's incomparable, isn't it? Anyway, Bielek reported that in 2137 all the coasts of the world had changed. Most of his references are about America because he was American, and obviously very clever, and didn't really take into account the rest of the world in his accounts for some reason. But apparently, most of Florida had disappeared, which, I mean, that means that there's a chance in the distant future there's a group of abandoned fucking ball pythons just knocking about in the ocean in the eastern corner of America, and fucking shitloads of alligators that have probably evolved into fucking saltwater crocodiles. Now, there was also, he says, there was no centralised effort to control the US, and it was all ruled locally by like a militia force, like small cells of militia. Al Bielek made a claim as well that was kind of similar to John Titor. In the future Al experience, the US and Europe, they'd work together to have a scrap with China and Russia, reducing the population of the world to about 300 million, which is 200 million people less than what the Georgia Guidestones recommends for the world population to be. So that adds some credence to both of them, like Titor and Bielek in a way. And also the idea that Titor puts forward about how he could come back in time to make an alteration to his timeline that could mean a totally new future for us, but instead of like not affect his timeline, if you get what I mean. Like, it'll change his timeline, but he can go back to his timeline, but it won't, the change he's made in our timeline won't change our future. Like, it just means his future won't happen the way it was, but stuff could still change in our time to make sure that future happens or doesn't happen. But now that he's done that, he's saved his future, if you're following. But the event that seems to have caused it could just be random, that caused the floods and the wiping out the people. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, I said at the top of the show that it's going to be might be hard to follow, because it's fucking time travel. Anyway, much like the Eastern European countries of the mysterious World War proposed by these time travellers, like World War III, you're going to now you the listener, you're going to be very much like the Eastern European countries. You're going to have to pick a side, because are you with Europe or are you with Russia? Al Bielek reckons he visited the year 2739, right? But John Titor says that time ends for his universe at 2564. But that could be because Titor came back and said that in the past, meaning that then became fact in his timeline, and that had to happen, meaning that his timeline now has to end at 2564 because it's already been set in stone in the past, albeit not literally in the Georgia Guidestones, but it's been said, so it shall be kind of thing. Because, time travel seems a little bit tricksy like that, But that's what I mean by pick a side. Like, you on Titor, you on Team Titor, or are you on fucking are you buddies with Bielek? I wanted fucking same letters, but nothing there. Fuck it. Anyway, Al didn't wake up in a hospital though in 2749. He was just flung to there, where he spent 2 years there, where, he picked strawberries, he lived in a caravan, he experimented a little bit with his homosexual urges with a Frenchman from a neighbouring caravan for a few months, but I hear it ended amicably, and they both went on with their lives, except Al was actually flung backwards, though, rather than going on with his life, he was flung backwards by a few hundred years in order to go and find his brother. Now, the brother hadn't had the chance for a gap year like Al had just had, and he was living in what sounds dystopian but kind of utopian as well. I mean, I'll let you decide. All the cities fucking flying through the sky, and the world was ran by an artificial intelligence called the Synthetic Intelligence Computer System, or SIX for short, and it gave its demands to the people via telepathy, fuck me. Brain's frazzled, man. It's an hard one, man, this. It was a really hard one. Stop, fucking let me crack on. Let's have a song, since we're talking about Al and Al Bielek and he's fucking a bit out there. Let's have a bit of Weird Al Yankovic again. We'll have this is the Weird Al Show theme. Anyway, in his 2 years in the 28th century, so Bielek spent 2 years there, and he learnt that wars no longer existed at this point. So the war that decimated the coastlines must have been long before then. So something to bear in mind. And now in the 28th century, there was no military, there was no soldiers, there was nothing like that. So countries couldn't even fight each other. Instead, they travelled back in time to the early 21st century and joined Pokemon card tournaments to settle their disputes, like men. Again, dystopian or utopian? You decide. The world was ran with socialist values at the time as well. There was no money in existence, except they all had credits, which they would then use them credits to buy things, which sounds a lot like money. It's kind of like saying in Japan they don't have money as you know it. They've got this thing called yen. You know, or in America, you know, they don't have money in America. They've got dollars. You know what I mean? Like, it's fucking mental. But Al's been through a lot at this point, and I think it's a shame that these are the things he remembers, because he didn't. Not once does he even mention his French lover. Not once. He didn't. In all the accounts from him I've read, he didn't even speak of him once. And you'd think that'd be something he'd bring up, you know, in his time picking strawberries and that, you know, that'd be at the forefront of his memories, but no, not even once. Frenchman, not even once for Al Bailick. But I can't find any information about any of that, so we'll stick with him and his brother. So him and his brother are then sent back in time, which realistically, you know, makes sense, because if this was the first bit of time travel by a government, then surely they'd report it and they'd try to replicate it. And by that, what I mean is, in the sense that it seems obvious and makes sense, is because if they got sent into the future and the government know there's a possibility, fuck me, we've sent 2 guys into the future, we don't even know how his brother got there, but he's there, so we got to try and put things in place for if a time traveller comes to us and says, you know, oh, hello, I'm Al Bailick, and I was on a boat in the 1940s. Did we win that war? What happened? And I'm guessing we did, because I've read the history book since, but just thought, you know, making conversation, a bit of idle chit-chat with you before I drop a bomb on you, you know. Oh, pardon the pun. And, I was a time traveller. I've just come back from the 28th century, and I was hoping can you get me back home? Obviously, you know, so it makes sense that there'd be scientists prepared, you know. They've also had up to, like, 600 years as well to prepare a way to send him back in time. And it's weird to think as well that by that point there could have been generations of scientists working day and night just to find a way to send at least one of these unfortunate brothers back to their own time. And no one in the world would ever believe them that that's what they were doing. And no one will ever believe that Al Bailick and his brother travelled backwards through time, because they're now back again. So, and they're not going to, like, they could arrive like 10 seconds after they left. So my question is here, is that a waste of a life? Like, all around for the scientist, well, all the scientists, for Al, for his brother, you know. Now, anyway, upon return to the 1940s, which is where they found the good doctor, they stopped off on the way in the 1980s. A lot like Terminator, where, ironically, in the 80s, they met Dr. Newman, which is, you know, Terminator was like a new human. Dr. Newman, they met, spelled Neuman. Anyway, Dr. Newman's job basically was to convince them they had to go back to 1943 and stop the experiment from ever taking place, which again is a lot like fucking Terminator. Go back and make sure none of this ever happens, make sure none of these things are made, make sure that Sarah Connor can't have a son, you know, and then it's like, oh no, we'll send our own back now so that you don't make the robots at all, fuck Skynet kind of thing, you know. Anyway, later in life, Al was trusted then at that point when he'd gotten a bit older and a bit more wiser, you know, and he was trusted by companies in the armed forces because they included the whiz kid himself, you know, in the Montauk Project and in psychical research for the armed forces. We will have a show on the Montauk Project that I would like to get a guest in for that one potentially, because I think it could be fun. Anyway, but Jack, I've looked up Al Bailick and it says he just worked a 9 to 5, is what you're thinking, because at this point you've probably fucking googled Al Bailick. Anyway, that's because he had to do that as like a cover job, he says, and he had access to the tunnels underneath America that spread across all of America, and that allowed him to have high-speed travel, which is, obviously this was before the teleporters were put in, supposedly. But I don't really believe in the teleporters. I think if they had a way to have teleporters, that would definitely be like everywhere, realistically, or we'd know more about that. The high-speed tunnels underground, we'd never know about, but teleporters, something would go wrong with a teleporter, we'd suddenly be aware, fuck me, there's teleporters. But then again, you could say that about Stargates, and most people don't really believe Stargates are real. Anyway, you know. So, After his 9 to 5 job, Bailey could finish his shift in this hardware store or whatever the fuck, a strip club or whatever he was working at, and then he'd go and work the night shift on Project Montauk, moonlighting essentially, which sounds dangerous as well to have someone involved in such what seems like to be such an important job that it's got to be secret, but to not let him sleep at all seems again like they were fucking experimenting more on Al than anyone else. Through the 70s, Al was the program director for the Psychics, but it seems like Al was the hero of his own story in a way, and a lot of people will just say he's an egomaniacal narcissist, but what if he was actually the victim of Montauk and using his greater intellect to work up the ranks so that they'd stop experimenting on him and he would get a bit of breathing space, and a bit of fucking freedom, because all of this could have just been a weird episode in Al's mind caused by being electrocuted by his former military handlers whilst aboard the USS Eldridge. And if you think of it just like that sentence there, everything I've been speaking about makes fucking perfect sense. But it starts to fall apart when we learn that he went back to the 80s, from the 80s to 1943 to stop the Philadelphia experiment from ever happening, meaning they never discovered the ability to time travel. But what if, again, to prove that had happened, and questions arise. So I've already tried to answer the questions without asking the questions, mix it up a bit for you. But what if they tattooed all of the Al Bailick and the other people that were on the ship, so that if they do go back in time or go forward in time, they've got some weird evidence, like a really weird specific tattoo, not like a fucking barcode like in Hitman, but I don't know, something like something from every time period. So Charlie Chaplin holding Pikachu whilst riding on top of a fucking Spitfire, something like that, where you'd be like, rah, okay, you're a time traveller, otherwise how would you possibly know about all these three things in the 1940s? Again, not too sure. Or it could have just been a code word. I guess code word would be better, wouldn't it? And that would always mean, hello, I'm a time traveller and you really need to listen to me because I'm telling you the truth. The code word could be something simple, like fucking... I'm terrible at this sort of thing, random words off the top of my head, which is weird because I can make up a story, but fucking like door handle, if he's got to say door handle 5 times in 2 minutes or something, and then you're like, oh fucking hell, he said door handle 5 times, he's a time traveller. Anyway, they cancelled the experiment. So how did they manage, if they did cancel the experiment, what you've got to question now is, how did they manage to then send Bailick back to 100,000 BC? Also forwards to the year 6037, and quite a few times they sent him to Mars, supposedly from the alien technology that they'd been reverse engineering for the psychical research. Now this is where it gets weird, guys. Al spent the last end of his life giving talks about his time-travelling adventures and other stories now regarded quite deeply in conspiracy lore. His real name was Edward Cameron, and he lived his life as Al Bailick in the body of another person back in time. Weirdly, he was never killed or silenced by the government, which means that either these people that invent mental things are killed before they get known, or that they aren't actually killed, and perhaps it's true that, genius is close to crazy. Maybe they're just fucking weird, impulsive people who enjoy cutting their own brake lines, or... I don't know, they've got an astounding ability to be able to shoot themselves multiple times in the back of the head. I feel like if he was killed younger in a suspicious circumstance, then it adds credence to the claim. And if he was killed in a suspicious way as he got older, it adds a lot of credence to the claim, especially when he's telling his story to people. But maybe the trick to telling conspiracy theories to the masses is to, mix in a few lies. Or to go fucking full on balls deep and say everything and more. That way, if you get killed, people will believe what you said even more. So by leaving him alone, it could be argued that the American government made his life a lot less believable, if you think about it that way. Now, some physicists believe we may live in a system of multiple universes, and that our universe is the universe without time travel, because the known rules of physics don't mean you can't time travel, but we simply just don't know how to do it. But this has been a really fucking heavy episode this week, at least from my point of view anyway. This was a cunt to research and put together, and you'll find all of the sources in the World Around You Discord, which is pretty much all that Discord is ever used for if you're interested in finding the sources. As I say, there's 15, 16, 17 different sources. So Now, as promised, here's a little rundown of the rules that we've discovered this week through time travel. So, rule number 1. You can collect items in the past without it affecting another time period. Maybe it even duplicates the item. Rule 2. You can tell people about time travel. It doesn't make time travel stop happening, and it doesn't make it happen more. And finally, rule 3. You can return to your own time, even though after the alterations you made, that future may never exist for the past you that you visited. Each timeline is separate. And what we're going to do is we're going to finish with a genuine scientist's thoughts on the matter. If you can get close to the speed of light, you could jump 60,000 years on Earth by flying towards light speed for 40 years, so long as it's a round trip to and from the centre of our galaxy. And now you see that, guys? That's why this week's show pissed me off. It was fucking confusing. Little to no fun at all researching this one, I'll be dead honest with you. About 9 fucking hours researching it, and then this is all I've got. And I'd be happy to not know much more about it, to be honest, for time travel, because I don't really think that at the end of most weeks. But time travel, yeah, I'd keep it in films and that, man, because as a thing to study, it's hard. I think it would be fun, you know, but I wouldn't mind not understanding how it works. You know, in the same way like a TV gun. I'm happy the TV gun works, but I don't need to know how it works. You know, do you know what I mean? Like who does? I mean, you could say that with a lot of science stuff, though, couldn't you? Like you could say, you know, to a degree, electricity. I mean, that's a mystery, innit? We shove it in these fucking rubber tubes and just fucking horse it into the walls of houses, and then we stick metal bits into the walls. And then them metal bits go to other things that either like fucking boil water, which makes sense, electric might get hot, but I mean if you stick your finger in a kettle, if you was to do that, does it electrocute you? Or is it just warm? Dunno. I don't really know. Rambling here anyway. Fucking... Right, I'm not going to just fucking list things I don't understand. So that's it from me. Like later today, we've got HDR and Jimmy Budd. And don't forget to listen to Truth Seeking and All with me and Jimmy Budd. That's live at 7 on Fresh Old FM every Thursday. I'll fucking see you in a bit.